Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to the Vaults Remastered, a story of converting an old 5th edition D&D game over to a Pathfinder 2nd edition remastered game. Today's topic is Relics, and I'm going to talk about the top 5 reasons you should be using these things for your campaign, your homebrewed game. And we're going to be looking at them from a Pathfinder 2nd edition perspective because that's where they are. That's where the rules are for them in the GM core. So let's go ahead and get into it. So first of all, what's a relic? What are you talking about? How do you make these things, etc.? Well, relics in game terms are nothing more than magic items, except that they have a lore purpose. They have a story purpose. So they're not just your standard, +1 weapon. They're not just a magic wand that has some charges and shoots some stuff out of it. They have a story. They have a purpose. They have connection to the overall game world. They're going to be a great tool for you to use to integrate and deploy a lot of your lore and history, that sort of thing. So in the GM core for Pathfinder 2nd Edition Remastered Rules, you'll find a section, I think it's around page 308, 309, somewhere's in there. It's a few pages long, and they get into relics. And so I've excerpted some chunks here from that section to put onto this slide. So here we go. You got a couple options for these relics, right? One is you can have them be a background relic. In other words, they're tied to a character's story, a background, history for these people. I think a good example of this, if I'm going to use a lot of Lord of the Rings references in this video at least, is if you go back to Frodo, he's carrying a magical sword known as Sting, and it glows blue when goblins or something like that are near. That is a background relic. It's tied into the history of his family, Bilbo, who gave it to him. It's not central to anything beyond just his character. Then you got campaign relics. These are the magic items that are central to the entire story. And, without them, the story itself might not even be possible. Another example here would be from the same Lord of the Rings, trilogy story, the One Ring, right? The Ring of Power, the ring that Frodo is bearing. So he has the second magic item, this magic ring, which is really just a ring of invisibility, but it's way more than that. It's tied into the entire campaign a journey of the fellowship and him trying to take it to the fires of Mount Doom and melting it to stop Sauron, right? That's a campaign relic. So those are your kind of two variations that you can think of as you're starting to create relics for your own game. Now, when you're going to go ahead and make a relic, the way the rules, the mechanics are set up are this: you're going to come up with aspects for your relic. In other words, the traits, the flavors for your relic. There's usually two. There might be more, it might be less, depending on what you're trying to do, but they should be associated with the relic itself. So something about that story, if it's a background relic, or something about that campaign world gives the flavor for that relic. Is it shadowy? Is it fiery? Is it, plant based? I mean, what is this thing? Then the next thing that you're going to come up with for your relics is some sort of system to have them advance. The relics themselves grow and expand just like the player characters do. And that's one of the great tools you're going to deploy with these things to make them interesting and to build in that lore. So there's going to be some sort of a system for leveling these things up. And then that ties into the third thing here, which is the gifts. These are the powers, these are the abilities that the relic has. So does it, glow blue when goblins are near? Does it allow you to become invisible when you put it on? Those are gifts. The gifts are related to the aspects, to the traits. And they're unlocked by the advancement process. So exactly what they do depends on the relic and depends on the lore, depends on if it's tied into the campaign or if it's just a background character item. And then the other thing that's cool with the Pathfinder rules, and this is the way I'm using it, is they are player driven. So the original relics I'm using came from my players from my 5e game, who the characters are no longer with us, but something of their person is still around. And it has manifested itself as a relic, which looks like just sort of a mundane, regular old object, but it has been infused with this old character's spirit, its energy. And so it kind of has a sentience to it, a personality, and it has some magical properties with it. So that's coming in from the background side of things. And then as my new players in the Pathfinder game acquire these things, they're able to level them up, advance them, and apply their own personality, their own needs, their own story to these relics, and customize them with different options, different types of gifts and such. And that is all linked to the original background of the object itself. And what I've been really looking at lately is then tying these relics into my greater campaign to give them more purpose for being in the game. So rather than just like, hey, it's a cool weapon that lights on fire or something like that, it has a main purpose, a plot hook of some sort that's going to be driving the train at some point. So let's go ahead and take a look at the top 5 reasons, top 5 uses for these relics. I've already mentioned a couple, but let's get into some specifics. Numero uno. These relics allow you to integrate your plot and progress it in whichever direction that you're trying to get or the players decide. So the one important thing if you're going to use them in this manner is to tie your relics into major plot points, right? They have to be connected to the plot. Uh, the relics also should be allowed to influence the narrative, influence the direction of the story. And as an example, a couple, sort of tropes here is maybe the relic is important for closing some dimensional rift. Maybe the relic is needed to defeat some foe, like, Sauron. You have to, melt down the One Ring, otherwise he's undefeatable. And maybe the relic could be tied in unlocking some secret of some ancient civilization that you need to learn. So there's some form or some method that you're using this for, some reasons that are important and central to the campaign itself. And if you make it integral to the plot like this, your players are going to get that connection to the story and feel the urgency of their quests to progress this plot forward to get these relics more, I guess, satisfied perhaps to fulfill their purpose. Number 2 reason is your character development and backstory linkage. So your relics should connect to the backstories of the characters. If you make these personal connections, the relics become more meaningful. So rather than just, oh, I've got a +1 sword, I found it in some, treasure hoard, whoopee ding, everybody's got a +1 weapon by level 4 or whatever. You have Sting, right? You have that weapon that is +1 short sword. It glows blue when goblins come near, and it's tied to the story of Bilbo and his time with the dwarves and Gollum and whatever else, right? There's a whole connection there that your players can learn about and develop. Also, the relics allow your players to grow, their character to grow. And, these connections can lead to these interesting character development opportunities, role play moments. Maybe this relic is this family heirloom, kind of like Sting. Maybe it's a symbol of the destiny of that character. And if they just fulfill it or follow what the relic is suggesting, they'll become the greatest whatever. Maybe it's just a tool for resolving a personal quest, finding a long lost sibling or whatever. There's lots of options you can use with these relics and tie it into them. Third use for these relics that you want to deploy is the mechanical enhancement, the customization of these things. This is beautiful because your relics can align. Oops, sorry. They can align with your character's classes. They can align with a play style of the character. They can align with the campaign's theme. So if you allow the relics to be customizable and give special benefits, abilities, spell-like stuff, stat bumps, that kind of thing, they're going to really be fun and exciting for your players to want to unlock and see what else they can do. It also allows you to introduce new mechanics to your game as the relics are growing in more power and yeah, at first it just lit up blue, but now it's like shooting laser beams out or something like that. That keeps the relic relevant. It keeps it, something exciting to find out more as you go through the game. So as your character's leveling up, something new happens. As your character achieves a new milestone, they're able to go and customize this thing with some new property. If your player character performs some action that is related to the item's lore, that could unlock something of its mystery. So all these decisions and choices that players are making are tied into the relic, and the relic is tied back into the character making decisions. So it's a nice self-feeding loop here. The fourth use for relics in your game is they allow you to implement, and this is something big for my own campaign, is moral choices, right? ethical dilemmas. There's nothing better than having a player go, should I do this, even though they can do it? Or asking the question, am I the bad guy if I do this? Or who is the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Those are great moral dilemmas to present to your players, and your relics can tie into that. So perhaps you attach a difficult choice or a moral implication to using your relic. Yeah, you can use this relic and do this cool thing, but if you do, something perhaps bad could happen. And it provides for consequences that have to be considered before you actually use it, right? It's easy to have a magic item and say, oh, yeah, on this turn, I'm going to use my magic item again. I'm going to use it again next turn. I'm going to use it again next turn. As long as I have charges, I'm going to keep using it. But what if each use was tied into something potentially bad? Maybe it could trigger a curse. Maybe somebody else wants it and you using it is attracting their attention. Again, think about the Lord of the Rings. Every time Frodo put on the Ring of Power and became invisible, it was useful for him, but it immediately attracted the attention of Sauron's eye, and the Nazgul were able to smell it, that kind of thing. They were coming for him. Another way to kind of make this fun is just sort of the limitation in uses. So yeah, it's once a day you can use it perhaps. Not like the charges of D&D per se, but just you can only use it once an hour, once a day, that kind of thing. Once a year if it's something really powerful. Another option here is what if using it requires some sort of sacrifice? Not like you need to go and slay somebody, but maybe, drops of blood, maybe some of your spirit essence, maybe wealth you need to sacrifice, something you have to give up in order to make use of this thing, especially as you're activating its bigger powers. And so this type of pro and con dilemma situation leads to good, interesting group discussions, decision making, role play, consequences. It adds the depth to your game rather than just, oh yeah, just go use that wand you have again, right? Well, if I use it, I have to saw off another finger, so I'm not sure I want to do that. Number five, and the fifth and final use of relics in your game, is for discovery and exploration. I've mentioned this a few times now. My game world has lots of lore, and I'm sure your homebrew world does too. But you can't just dump all this information on your players during a game session, or hope and pray that they go find that book or that scroll that you left in the library, that they'll uncover pages of your lore. What if you create a carrot or stick sort of situation where they want to go pursue something, this relic in its story, or they want to avoid somebody getting the relic, so they need to take it someplace, whatever, right? Discovery, exploration is tied into this. It's a system you want to encourage your players to go out and understand this item that they have better. Again, if it's just a basic plus one this or plus one that or a magical staff and it just does something when you say a command word, that's not super exciting. It really doesn't encourage anything other than just sort of meta, yeah, I'm going to use my optimal combination this turn. You can use these things to drive story itself, to get them to go places, to learn things. It also should be tied into having your players have some sort of ingenuity or bravery to actually understand their relic, to unlock it fully, to find it, to take it someplace. Maybe they're going to need to explore an ancient ruin. They're going to have to go and take on some formidable creature or go to some mystical location to find out the truth or how to get this relic to do more. Or the relic is supposed to go someplace. Like again, think about the One Ring, right? Frodo never would have left the Shire if he didn't have to take that ring and go to, Mordor with it. And think of all the places he had to go along the way that were then explored and all the enemies he faced along the way because of that relic. So this is a great opportunity for you to incentivize exploration, and then it also gives the players a sense of accomplishment as they're going and doing things and unlocking more of this relic, its lore and its powers. They're now, ooh, this is something I should go do more of because I can get more out of this thing. So it's really important if you're going to do this that the rewards are worth the effort. All right, so hey, let's talk about how do you go ahead and then build a relic, right? So first things first, I've mentioned them as just magic items, but they're way more than that. They're actually these customizable, lore integration tools, what I would refer to them as. You can customize them so the players can customize them. You can customize them. They're not something you're going to find in a book somewhere. They are full of lore. They've got the backstory of the previous owner. In the case of my game world, the vaults, your options may be different. You're able to integrate them, both the plots, the characters, to moving things forward. And it's a tool. It's something that you can use, your players can use to engage, to interact, to carry the stories forward. So as far as how do you go about building these, a lot of this relies upon what you're going to find in the GM core and the way I've based it from my own game world, and the way I've adapted it to my vaults world. The first thing I do for each of my relics is come up with its identity. What is this thing? And the basics here, of course, are a name for it, some sort of cool name, and some sort of interesting picture, right? Then you want to have a vivid description. What does it look like when you first encounter this thing? Maybe it's making a weird sound or something. And then I also like the idea of having a really powerful sensory impression when you first pick it up. When like Frodo grabs the ring, right? He sees the flash of the eye of Sauron. That is a very powerful sensory impression that you get from this relic. So I think it's very important to have those items, that identity that really makes this thing stand out from anything else you might show them. Then the second thing here is you want to come up with the lore for this. This is what the GM core is talking about as a campaign, story, or is it backstory, type of relic. What is the lore? What is special about this relic? What's the background? For me, it was tied to my old player characters and what happened in the previous game and how that triggered cataclysmic events, which my current players in the Pathfinder game are trying to now solve. So that background lore of the relic, of the previous owner, of the game role is attached to these things. The other thing I'm doing with mine is how do you unlock some of the story? How do you get some of this narrative to come out? So I've designed for each of my relics some sort of actions or activities or situations that if the current owner does, or a situation they get themselves into, that can trigger an unlock. It can reveal some more of this lore from this backstory. So that's going to help me bridge the old game and then provide some clues and information that can then move the current game forward in new directions. So that's the second thing I've done. The third thing then gets into the mechanics, the actual stuff that you're going to find in the GM core. What does this relic do? If you look at the GM core, there are 12 aspects. There's two more. I think it was in Dark Archive. Don't quote me on that one though. But there's 14 flavors or traits or these aspects you can plant the seeds on these relics themselves. So fire, you know, water, elemental stuff, soul and dragon. I think are the two I'm recalling from the Dark Archive, if that was the source. But anyway, there's flavors. So look at your relic, look at that lore, right? Look at what it is, what it's important for, and then what of these aspects might it have? Is it going to be the Ring of Power, for instance, might have fire as its aspect. It might have shadow because of the Nazgul and turning invisible, that sort of thing, right? So what would your relics aspects be? And then those are going to determine some of the gifts, which are going to come up in a second. But the other thing I've done that's homebrew customized for me is I wanted to reward the characters for that initial acquisition, that initial discovery, that initial studying of their relic, picking it up and bringing in some of that lore. So I applied what I call a preliminary boon. And so the players, for me, are going to get trained in something that relates to the previous player character. So if they were to pick up something from a rogue, let's say, maybe it gives them training in stealth, or maybe it gives them training in thievery. Whatever, depends on the previous character. So that is a preliminary boon that you get from what in D&D terms would be attuning. But I've actually developed an unlock procedure that I'm using during my first downtime activity. So the initial session or two, the players have discovered these relics, have acquired one that they've then been linked to somehow for some reason. They're not sure. It's given them a little bit of vision. It's given them a little bit of that sensory impression. And now they're trying to learn more as they get to a sanctuary area where they can downtime and rest and become level 1. So during that procedure or during that time, they're going to do some sort of unlock procedure. It's not some big prescription thing. You could make it a ritual. You could make it some, detailed ABC. But I'm going to give them just some basic ideas of how the relic is encouraging them to do things. And then we'll role play how the character listens to this and goes through that process. And at the end, they've unlocked this thing after 3 days or whatever. And now they suddenly find themselves knowledgeable of religion or some sort of lore or whatever. Then once they have attuned to this item, they start to level it up through various means, and as they do so, minor gifts will unlock, major gifts will unlock in the mid levels, and then the grand gift will unlock at the pinnacle of power. I think it's like level 17. And all of these gifts, these powers, these feats is what they really amount to be. They're tied back into those flavors, into the aspect of that particular item. And I can show you a couple examples of these in a second. And then the last thing I've also done is mechanically, and this kind of gets to the price, to the sacrifice. There is a drawback for using these gifts. And there'll probably be drawbacks that grow in severity as you go from minor, major, or grand. Or perhaps they're tied into, could be certain plot moments or something to that effect that if you use it at a certain time or at a certain event, this thing will happen that can be painful or cause some sort of negative impact on the player to make them think twice about, hey, this relic, this is serious business. I shouldn't just be pew pew pewing with it. All right, let's take a quick second to flip over to the traits here, to the gifts for these relics. So I'm gonna pop over to my GM core and kind of scroll through a little bit here. So as you can see, there are pages of gifts that you can apply to your relics. As an example down here, we have the celestial gifts. So if you have a relic that has the celestial aspect to it, so in my game terms, that would be the previous character had some sort of holiness to them, maybe some sort of religious, tie-in, something like that, that imbued their relic from the old game with some celestial energy. Then celestial gifts would be the things that the new player could apply to this relic as they grow in power. So example, divine retribution. This is a minor gift. It has the holy trait. It's one of the celestial gifts. Prereqs, the relic has to be some sort of weapon. So if you're going to apply this gift to that item, then that item needs to be part of some weapon. Perhaps the relic itself is not the weapon, but it's been attached to a weapon. That's certainly possible in the case of some of these items that I've come up with for my player characters. But if you take a look at it, it has a 2 action activation. You draw upon Divine Fury. You single out a target that damaged you or an ally within the past round, and fill your relic with Divine Vengeance against them. Make a strike against that foe, dealing an additional damage die on a hit. If the target has the Unholy trait, it's also enfeebled 1 until the start of your next turn on a hit, or enfeebled 2 on a critical hit. So that would be an example of a gift that you could apply at the minor level to your relic once you've unlocked that ability and it has that aspect celestial to it. So that's an example of how you can use your relics to give them new powers and make them, more fun and interesting for your player characters. All right, so that is what we're talking about mechanically speaking. Okay, so then relevance is probably the most important thing, at least for me in my game, and maybe for you if you're homebrewing your own stuff as well, is the relevance of your relics. What is their purpose to the story? If they're simply to give your player characters some, special, +1 this or ability to cast that, divine strike or whatever, that's not really good relevant use, right? It's you might as well just grab something out of the back of the GM core or whatever, or a treasure vault, and use that because they're already made for you. You don't have to go through all this trouble. But if you're going to go through the trouble of making customizable designer magic items that have lore attached to them and are things the players can grow with and expand and pursue, then they should have a purpose to the overall story itself. And so each of my relics, as I've designed them, I've gone, to this sort of nth degree, as I've coming up with what are some ongoing connections between this relic and the PC. How does it connect them to the plot directly? And so the initial thing when they first find this relic and do this attunement process, this unlocking of their boon, it's going to give them a pulse of power, if you want to think about that, which helps explain how they go from, level 0 refugee to a level 1 adventurer. But it's going to start them down this path. It's going to put them on this destiny, whatever that is for their particular character. So it depends on the character themselves. So you have to bring in those backstories. But then you have the relic itself has its purpose, right? So you have the cool thing is now you're fusing these two worlds together somehow. And then the ongoing process is it carries through the player's story arc. So it should help that player complete their arc, whether it's, rescuing their long lost sibling or whatever it is, or slaying the murderer of their parents or something to that effect, right? This relic can tie into that arc for the character, and it reveals more and more of itself and the character as it goes through the story, and it'll reveal more and more of the previous lore from the other characters. So having a way to tie the old character to the new character, even though they're completely different players and everything else, that's the real fun and challenge, at least for me, the GM. But I think it's also going to be fun and cool for the player to see that they sort of have this psychic connection almost with this other person who may or may not still be alive. And then the other big thing that I'm doing as far as relevance goes is coming up with a role in the larger narrative. How does this thing that I've created, and I've got one relic for each of my player characters, how does it tie into the big picture? How does it tie into the narrative? How does it tie into the theme? For me, my game theme is chaos, the forces of chaos, anarchy. They are struggling to, be free, and, perhaps some of them are into destruction versus the forces of order and law and perhaps tyranny. And these two forces are colliding in the game world. So, how does this relic tie into that? Is it a force of chaos? Is it a force of order? Is it somewhere in between? Could it be one or the other? Each relic has a special role to play, and I want them to be flexible enough that it could fall on either side of the spectrum, just depending on what the players do. Although it might also be fun if the relic is fighting the player to, hey, stop being chaotic and destroying things. I'm a tool of law and order. That could make a wicked cool, conflict. One of those, part of that drawback, part of that sacrifice, system that I was talking about. The relevance. So anyway, those, mein Freunds, are my thoughts on these relics. So wrapping this stuff up, why are we using these things? Why should we use them? And then how do you go about building these things? Let's take a look. The narrative significance, for sure it's there, right? You can intricately weave these relics into your plot. They'll serve as a catalyst for your story events, your quest objectives, they're sources of lore, world building, you name it. Ding, great tools for a GM. Second, character connection, right? They can be personalized, they can resonate with the PCs, their backstories, their ambitions, their races, whatever it is. That's great for your players. They want to get into that stuff. Mechanical integration. This is good for you and your players. You're able to give these things special abilities. They can modify character stats. So let's say, for instance, you need your characters to be a little more powerful because they're starting a dangerous, arc of the campaign. You can use your relics to bump them a little bit, right? It allows you to introduce new game mechanics. Maybe some sort of dimensional travel is in the works. So rather than needing some wizard to have some sort of spell, the relics themselves can open these portals. I don't know. It allows you lots of different options now. And the same thing, that characters can customize things and add these new tools and tricks to their repertoire that they might not get from a class decision or from an ancestry decision. Fourth one, dynamic plot devices. These things evolve over time, right? So they're going to be constantly relevant. They keep giving fresh gameplay experiences for your players, for you to develop some more narrative, right? You can start exploring uh, old stuff from your previous game world, like I'm doing. You can start exploring new stuff with the new players are doing. It's a great little tool to, flex back and forth. Fifth, final thought here is that these relics offer a thematic or help with thematic and world cohesion. They're going to help you embody, or they can embody, the central conflict, chaos, and order for me. They can symbolize deeper concepts. Maybe your story is about redemption. Maybe your story is about sacrifice or power. You can have your relics symbolic of these things, and you might only have one or two, where I've got like one for every character. You can come up with just one or two, like the Ring of Power is an example of that one, right? And sixth and final thought here, uh, player agency discovery, right? This is something that most player characters want, especially if you're running some sort of sandboxy game, some sort of homebrew campaign. With these relics, you can encourage engagement in the story through exploration to try to learn more about the relics, to find the relics, experimenting with the relics, what they do, uh, taking the relics and interacting with the game world to uncover, their mysteries and using them to go places that were maybe off limits earlier. So it definitely opens your options for discovery. It gets the players to want to do stuff with them. They can go places now and try to learn more about it's their magic item, right? It's their story they're building now, and it's symbolic or symbolized by this object you've created. So there you go, ladies and gents. Those are my thoughts on relics, why you should use them, how you can build them, and all the different benefits that you can get from them. So if you found any of this information interesting, fascinating, cool, awesome, whatever, go ahead and like the vid, right? Subscribe to the channel, click your notification bell, all those cool things. Throw some comments down below. If you've done some homebrewing of magic items before, have you gotten this detailed with them? Have you ever used relics in your Pathfinder game? And even if you're not playing Pathfinder, I think the system is definitely usable for whatever you're playing. If you're doing D&D or 13th Age or whatever you're playing, making these customizable magic items is a great tool, great resource. All right, have yourselves a good day, and I will catch you on the next video.